Welcome back to the OPEX podcast. On today's episode, I had the pleasure and honor with speaking with co-founder of Precision Nutrition, author of the book Changemaker, and founder of Changemaker Academy, John Berardi. On this episode, John and I discuss behavioral change and how this can maximize your performance, health, and well-being. Guys, this was a great conversation with John. I know you're going to love it. Stick around. JB, it is an absolute honor to speak to you, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for reaching out, actually. I kind of got this email out of the blue recently and was like, hey, I'm a huge fan, love to be on the show. And it was so timely because I had been asking around if anyone knew you and if they could do an intro so I could get on the show because I'm a big fan of what you're doing. I'm a big fan of what James is doing. Spent some time down in Arizona this year in the winter and got a chance to hang out with James, and it was great. So I guess it was meant to be.
Absolutely. Serendipity, as they say.
Yeah.
So, John, nobody listening to this is going to need you to give a background. I think what would be really good for the listeners would be if you give them a sort of an update on where you are currently, what's going on with Precision Nutrition, what have you got coming up next, and that will kind of set the groundwork for our conversation today.
Yeah, that sounds great. Precision Nutrition is just rocking on, and that's how most people know me, as Mr. Precision Nutrition. So when I appear places, they're like, okay, go talk about carbs now, and that was a big part of my life for a long time, and still is, and that's fantastic. And so in 2017, though, PN had grown to the point where you're just having two founders, two dudes, entrepreneurs, trying to float the whole ship. Financially, it wasn't feasible anymore. I mean, PN was growing so quickly, and there comes a point in a business's life cycle where if anything were to go wrong, and nothing was going wrong, but if it were to, the founders just simply don't have enough money to fix it. You know what I mean? You could sell all your things and it wouldn't make a dent when 2 weeks of payroll is worth more than everything you own. You know what I mean? So we were looking for some outside investment, and we found a great partner. So they bought about 80% of the company, which infused a ton of capital and resources. And so since then, PN has just been flying. I mean, doing some fantastic innovations on the software side, doing great content. And so, my role has been to just kind of step back, bring on a team who can continue the legacy of the work that we started and let them go. And so that's been amazing, and it's been going great. And by the end of 2018, that was in place. So they can move on without me, in a really positive way. And so, Phil and I still touch base periodically with the team, but at I guess if you want to call it, super high level. And so, while that was happening, because these things aren't just like discrete points in time or like stop PN, start something else, I had for years been wanting to do, I don't know, I guess a book or something where I could share what I think I've learned over these last 30 years in the field. And, I say it very specifically that way, what I think I've learned, because it's really interesting to try and unpack what you've learned. Like if you actually, listeners or whatever, have to sit down and figure out there's words that I say out loud all the time, right? But are they true? Are they really what I know? And oftentimes they're not. They're kind of what mixed with a social filter, mixed with what you think would be a great soundbite. So I had been wanting to capture what I really think I've learned over the last 30 years about how to have a meaningful purpose in this field, about how to have a successful career. This is, I don't know, this has been my purpose. I first started out in the field and I dabbled in various aspects of it. But when I really landed at the place where I'm like, oh, this is what I meant to do, I realized, it's to work with professionals. It's to help the professionals that I get to interact with sort of see their clients differently, see themselves differently, and then take this field to a new place. And so that's been my purpose. So as the PN work tapered down and I was hiring people to take my place there, I realized, oh, there's this big opportunity to now speak directly, not through the vehicle of nutrition, but through the vehicle of purpose and unique abilities and values and career to all the professionals in the space. So I ended up writing a book called Changemaker, and I'm super proud of it. It's a really, really personal book. I mean, it's about the professional, how to discover your purpose, and then turn that passion that you have for health and fitness into a career. And so I'm very excited about the work. And then from there, as I was writing it, as I was capturing it, at sort of a new company spun out of that called the Changemaker Academy. And so that's kind of what I'm putting my adult professional responsibility and time into. But then I have a number of other projects on the go. For example, we have 4 children, and so one of the passion projects we have here is we write children's books together. And so now that Changemaker's out, next year is going to be really devoted to getting our first 3 children's books out. And that's that stems from a project I started a long time ago, where when our daughter was born, she's 9 now, I would just capture thoughts that I would want to teach her one day when she was old enough or whatever. And then I was like, well, maybe I'll turn this into a book that I'll give her when she's a high school student or something. And then I started to get annoyed because I'm like, isn't this what I often do and people often do? We sort of delay these things in our lives. Like, oh, one day I will do the grand, excellent thing that I plan on doing. And I was like, but I have these children here right now, and they need to learn stuff right now. And we're spending time together now. So what if we turn these lessons into books that are digestible at these ages, like picture books or early readers or whatever? So that's been another fun project of mine lately. And it's great to just collaborate with our whole family on them. So that's kind of the things I'm up to nowadays.
Just so you know, I have a bucket list of questions and whatnot to dive in here, but just something I want to do, John, before we go any further is, as I said to you before we hopped online, your work has, I've followed your work like a lot of people. It's just followed your work for years and I've always admired it from afar. Listened to a ton of your interviews on a lot of different podcasts. And what I done over the last 2 or 3 days was I kind of just made this list of words, certain people's names, and certain descriptions of maybe certain life events that happened, and I just want to list them out. And the reason why I want to do this is that if I ever got another opportunity to sit down and talk, or even during our conversation today, these are definitely areas I really would love you to elucidate on. And obviously I think as well, a lot of what I'm about to say here too will give the listener such a huge scope of reference as to where the Changemaker has come from. So like
I love it.
When I think of John Berardi, this is what comes into my head: mentorship, soliciting feedback and giving feedback. That was a huge thing I've taken away from hearing you speak. The art of communication, embracing the process versus outcome, separating role from your soul, which is something you spoke about with Kevin Larrabee about, attaining wisdom, attaining mastery through craft, personal growth and development, the words father, husband, and friend, your Italian family and what it meant to come from an immigrant family and to be someone very driven, your life-changing event with those friends in the car, which I can, if you want to loosen that, you can. The idea of the power of being an introvert, your first mentor, Craig, the 240 pound bodybuilder who was a mentor and sent you on personal training courses and gave you a job. Peter Lemon's influence on you. Your discussion always around systematic progression with clients. You always give the snatch analogy. Just do this. Lowest hanging fruit and minimum effective dose. What's going to move the needle with clients? Sustainability. Is what I'm asking the client to do sustainable? This is a big one. I always love you when you talk about this. The knowing versus the doing. July 18th. That's a special day for you. Your thoughts on aging and longevity. And also, you don't speak about this much, but if you ever did want to speak about death, I'd love to hear you speak about that, your thoughts around that. Because I know you spoke about on Michael Gervais' podcast about the aging and longevity. I know that's a huge thing at the moment. You were a premature baby, and I really enjoyed when you shared your thoughts around this in a number of interviews you've done. The chip on the shoulder, using grievances as fuel. I really enjoyed when you spoke about that, because it's a conversation I've had with a friend of mine, Dr. Pat Davidson, about kind of doing things out of spite. And you'll get some people say, listen, if you're doing it out of spite, it's not really good because you're not really doing it for you. You're doing it to prove others wrong. But then at the other end of that, you'd say, but look at all the great things that can come out of spite, you know, like the great inventions and whatnot.
Yeah.
So that's something I think is really, really good. And I know you said now in your later years, not that you're an old man at all in terms of life nowadays, but you've more mellowed from that sort of mindset of having to think you have to prove to others. But I mean, it's a conversation I love to speak about with others too. Sort of that, when does doing something out of spite be beneficial versus detrimental? I'm almost finished here. Your time in South Beach, and what I really found fascinating here, John, is you left that really great lifestyle in South Beach to go attain a master's in Eastern Michigan, and went from earning a nice salary in great weather to $6,000 a year as a graduate student. And sort of that decision, I suppose, I'm always fascinated when people make these life decisions of going from something that is comfortable and safe and known, and it gives you certainty, into the unknown. And particularly when the unknown initially is kind of shitty, and you still stick it out, and then reflecting back on it years later, that it was the right decision, but at the time it was a scary thing to do. And the last few things I have here is just names: Georges St. Pierre, San Antonio Spurs. And one final note I made here. This is an area I love that when you speak about. And you haven't said this, but it's just a note I made. Prevention is better than the cure. And what I meant by that was, I heard you speak about, before I got married, we did marriage counseling. Before I have any mental health issues, I already do mental training and I go see a counselor. Before I became a parent, I got coaching in parenting. And like, the reason I did this list out today, John, is because everything that I've named here, it just resonates so highly with me. And I guess when I hear someone else speak about it, and I don't hear a lot of other people, the majority, speak about it, I'm kind of like, there is someone else out there who has these similar thoughts. It just resonated with me, this list. So I really just wanted to say that list out to you out loud, because I felt that it would set a better framework for us two right now on this medium, and maybe also for where this discussion will lead for the listeners. I don't know if you have any thoughts on what I said there.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. A lot of inside jokes and inside stories there for sure. So folks, if you haven't listened to every single podcast I've ever done, you got some work to do.
all linked up in the show notes.
No, that's great. I'm glad those things resonate with you. I mean, you really captured a number of things which I consider to be essentials for how I want to live my life. I'm not in a position, I have no desire to tell others how to live their lives, but I think sometimes, I don't know, I think a lot in terms of analogies all the time. So if there's something that I want to understand or do, the first place my head goes to is, where is that understood elsewhere, or where is that done elsewhere? And how do I bring that into what I want to do? And I felt really super validated, recently reading David Epstein's newish book, Range, which I don't know if you've read yet. But he talks about, this is where innovation comes from. It's not from just thinking harder about the problem in front of you. It's about stepping aside the problem. It's saying, what's happening right next door? And I bring this up because I think there's only, I don't know, maybe a few universal truths, that I don't know if I know what any of them are, but I think I sometimes spiral close to, the galaxy that they live in. And you capture a whole host of them about, ways of being in the world. So thanks for the list. I think it was great. Are there any topics from that list you want to dig into a little bit more?
Well, I suppose, and another one I didn't say there was principles based and fundamentals first. You're big on that too. I suppose because we are going to talk about change and behavior, and obviously with the release of Changemaker and Changemaker Academy, let's get into that, because I'm fascinated with human behavior. I really am. And as
Mm-hmm.
just before I went online there, I asked, have you read Robert Sapolsky's book Behave? Because I think
Mm-hmm.
that's just required reading. I
Mm-hmm.
think that should be like an actual subject in like high school. I think everyone should go
Mm-hmm.
through like some sort of course on human behavior. But John, as you know, as anyone, the science is one thing, the knowing is one thing. It's the doing and facilitating the doing. And I've always appreciated when you kind of speak about when the coach blames the client, this kind of
Mm-hmm.
coach centered versus client centered, idea.
Mm-hmm.
So behavior change, the mic is yours, as they say. You just
Yeah.
wrap on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm presuming most of the folks listening are coaches, so hopefully this really lands for them. Probably one of my greatest early epiphanies in this field was this idea that, and it's often been quoted now, but it hadn't been quoted at the time. We weren't as connected to each other, and these conversations weren't happening as broadly. But the notion that you can write the most amazing program, and if the people in front of you can't do it for whatever various reasons, then your effort, your training, your hundreds of thousands of dollars in continuing education are completely useless. They're completely wasted. You have to go through environment and human psychology to get to performance and results. There's no way through that um, any other way. And so I learned that lesson the hard way as a young coach. I was like, I'm great at programming. I got great results for myself. I get great results for the people who are willing to do all the things that I say. But is that 10% of them? You know what I mean? 8% of them, and dreaming of a day where all the clients will be obedient and do everything you say, you're going to be dreaming for a long time, and you're not going to have any reality. It's like a business lesson that I learned. It was so seminal. I was working at PN, and it was early days, and I would always complain about resource constraints. If we had more money, we could X, Y, and Z. If always there's this hopeful, beautiful future where all the pain in the ass factors of today disappear, and we're living in magical unicorn land where we don't have any problems, right? And then I started consulting with Apple. So I am sitting at the richest company in the entire world. And one of their executives says, resource constraints. If we only had more money, we could. And then it just like landed on me, right? Like, what a powerful lesson. I'm like, you don't get any more money than these guys have. You know what I mean? It doesn't exist, right? So if they still have the constraints that I'm also complaining about, then they will never go away. Then I need to exist in this plane of reality, And it's the same with coaching. We have to just stop complaining about clients and blaming everyone else. I was down at Altus recently. I spent the winter in Arizona, and so Stu and I did a conversation for one of the apprentice coach programs, and one of his questions was around how do you change the culture of sport so it becomes a more integrated process rather than a bunch of practitioners operating in siloed ways, pretending to be integrated. And so he had actually gone around the room and collected a survey of all the coaches in the room. There are maybe 30 people there from all over the world, asking why they thought this integrated process didn't exist. And every single answer blamed someone else. The system, the idiot higher ups, you know what I mean? Every answer was outside of self, outside of control, and it feels the same thing. I maybe feel like I'm dancing around tangentially here, but this to me is a universal truth. You have to take responsibility for you in the world. So as a coach, this was the lesson that I got out of it. I can't blame clients for being lazy or not following through with whatever my genius plan is. I have to take 100% responsibility for the outcome, not just the programming, right? If a client isn't doing what I recommended or suggested, then I either recommended or suggested it wrong. Yeah. Or there's a barrier for them that I haven't helped them overcome. And so it all became, I am accountable all the way through. And I think that's the psychological factor that we've been handed as coaches. Our work stops at the delivery of sound programming. And I think that needs to change. So when I say my purpose in the field, one part of that bucket of helping coaches see their clients differently and themselves differently is this: you are no longer the deliverer of programming. That's not like, let's be honest, it's not even an inspiring job. I write things down on paper and I hand it to people. That's not inspiring. It's not purposeful. It's not meaningful. When you take responsibility for the outcome as well as the prescription, everything changes. And now, you're not going to get 100% of the people, right? So this is where people start doing edge case work, where they're like, all right, but what about the one person who really is lazy? I'm like, fine. You know what I mean? Fine. You will meet them. You know what I mean? But right now you're leaving 8 out of 10 on the table, So that's really, I think, a huge shift that a lot of coaches need to go through. This idea of, changing from prescription only to, being accountable for follow through. And then the real question becomes how, right? What is your role then? And then your role is, after you've come up with this prescription, well, maybe we should even start with the coming up of the prescription. And this is, what we taught at PN. The prescription should be co-created rather than coach created. Can you collaborate with the client? And again, this is where people get all edge casey with me, and they're like, yeah, but clients don't, what if they don't know what works for them? I'm like, well, that's why you're sitting in front of them. It's not up to them. I'm not just going to be like, what would you like to do next, good sir? And he's like, pizza. And I'm like, oh, great, pizza. That sounds really good. I'm glad you, no, we co-create it, here's a range of options. And I looked at parenting here, and you can force your children to do things with might and brute force. They're small, they're weak. You know what I mean? I can bully them. I can force them to do things. But that's not good for the relationship, just like coaching, right? So what am I going to strive to do with children? We're gonna talk about what their goals and objectives are, in a kid way, and then I'm gonna help provide some options, a range of options for them that may help them get closer to those goals and objectives. And the funny story I often tell is like the putting the winter coat on. We live in Canada, and so it's cold for a good chunk of the year. And little kids sometimes don't like to put their coat on and go outside, right? They just want to go without a coat, and then life sucks. It can get to be minus 40 degrees here, or you need something on, But if you're just like, put your coat on, no, you're just gonna have these fights in the mudroom every day. And so instead, one day I was just like, well, what if I got another coat and let her have the ability to choose? So, hey, honey, instead of put your coat on, oh no, it's, hey, would you like the pink or the yellow coat today? So I give her a range of suitable options, and then she gets to have some autonomy in the process. And so that's what we're looking at. So step one is co-create the plan with the client, generated by the options that you think are suitable for them. And then once you've co-created the plan that they feel ownership over, then you reality test it, confidence testing on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being there's no chance in hell I could do this, and 10 being, of course, trained monkey could do this. How confident do you feel you can do this thing every day for the next 2 weeks? And that's another hugely missing factor from medicine, from coaching, whether it's personal training or athlete coaching. We're like, God, I gave them this thing and the stupid people can't do it. You're like, well, did you ever ask whether they thought they could do it in the first place? Because if you did and they said 4 out of 10 and you gave it to them anyway, whose fault is that, dummy? You know what I mean? So now, I don't say any of these things to be uncharitable, because this was me starting out. Like I'm talking to former self, you know, and again, this was a development process I had to go through, realizing, hey, if I want to be in this field, I mean, I could want the field to churn me out and spit me out. You know what I mean? Like if I wanted that, I just keep going. I ignore everything I'm saying here, just keep coaching away. You know, I tell you what to do and I just wait for the 1 out of 10 who can do it. But the field's going to spit you out pretty quickly. You're not going to get any clients and whatever. You know, but even more, your own personal fulfillment just diminishes. You know, the ability to work with humans in a way that sort of works within the context of their real life is actually really, really rewarding. It's harder in the beginning because you don't know what you're doing. You know, we talked about George St. Pierre before we started recording, and he's maybe one of the greatest, you know, mixed martial artists ever. But one day he didn't do martial arts. He sucked at it. You know what I mean? And he had to learn it just like every other human has to learn things. So you'll suck at this at the beginning, and that's okay. Everyone sucks at new things. And then you just have to practice and get better and be around other people who are committed to the same kind of work until you get a little less sucky, and then maybe okay, and then after more practice a little bit good, and then maybe after that maybe you're great, you know. And that's how all the progression happens. So, you know, really this idea, we call it client-centered at Precision Nutrition, which was the original question. And it's this idea, co-creating programs or next actions with clients, reality or confidence testing with them, seeing if, you know, they even feel confident they can do it. And then what the last part would be considered kind of like lifestyle architecture or design, right? You work with them on the things that are in the way of being able to execute the thing, you know? So, you know, is it temptation? Is it time constraints? You know, I in the book, I write about how years ago, my wife Amanda and I were renovating a house that was about an hour and a half from where we were staying, which was with her parents at the time. You know, we had lived a place, we sold it, we wanted to do a renovation on another place. We had nowhere to live in the meantime. We're living with their parents. So wake up, trying to run a growing business, wake up in the morning, work for 8 hours, and then we drive an hour and a half to this house, work on the house, drive an hour and a half home, and then on the weekends we'd be at the house all day. So now imagine I don't do what I do. I'm not John Berardi from Health and Fitness. I just, my 8 hours during the day is a totally different job. And I hire a coach, and that coach is like, okay, well, to get in great shape, we need to, you know, work out 4 to 6 hours a week, and your nutrition needs to look like this. There's no way I could have done that, right? So I actually ended up hiring a coach, and I said, here's my constraints. I want to be able to get my workout done in 10 to 15 minutes, 3 times a week. And I want to do it next to the bed when I wake up in the morning. Like I want to get out of bed, do my 15 minutes, go pee and brush my teeth, start my day, never think about exercise until Wednesday, you know, again. And obviously I hired a good coach, someone I know, and he got really, really clear on what my goals and needs were, and he created something that worked just fine. I mean, I wasn't in the greatest shape of my life, but after 8 months of doing this, I was just fine. I didn't lose anything appreciable in terms of strength or size or any of those kind of things, right? And, you know, I just wonder what would have happened if I would have threw a dart at a dartboard of random trainers, what they might have given me in terms of advice, what they might have thought of me as a human. You know what I mean? Oh, this guy doesn't want it bad enough. He's lazy. You know, not for a second considered that I might have real time constraints. So now I'm pretty good at this, right? So I said, here's how I'd like you to embed this workout plan in the architecture of my life. As a coach, your role with the average client would be broader. You'd be the one that would have to figure out to do it in the morning after you get out of bed, before you go pee, kind of thing, you know? So this to me is sort of the client-centered philosophy. Co-create, confidence test, and then figure out how to architect this thing into their lives, you know? And that's what makes it fun. It makes your job a little more dynamic, you know, because you have to be a better practitioner. Like you need to know the science and the application of movement way better. Because if you're just like, no, there's one way to get muscles, and it's do this kind of volume, this kind of intensity, and then someone's life doesn't accommodate that, you're a crappy coach if you can't morph your program. You can't go, oh wait, oh here's a new constraint, that's really interesting. All right, I bet we could force hypertrophy under these new conditions pretty easily, right? I mean, otherwise you're just doing templated stuff. You might as well just print out workouts from the internet and hand them to people. That's essentially what you're doing if you're not playing co-creation with your clients. So obviously I get charged up about this. You know, it's a thing that I'd like to see the industry change about itself. And but I also feel like compassion and tolerance for the time that it'll take, because it's new. It's a new industry. It's young. You know, I mean, people didn't start being paid to take people through recreational exercise as a means to improve health before like 40 years ago. You know, that's really how new our field is, and nearly every other field is a little bit more advanced. You know.
Yeah. I heard you speak about that with Kevin Larrabee. You know, you're like compare the fitness industry or profession to chemistry. There's a big difference in their date of birth.
Yeah, it's true. And what was happening in chemistry for the first 1500 years, you know, it was like alchemy and nonsense, you know, like people were like, there's, you know, I don't know, it took about 1,000 years before Aristotle's like, there's 11 basic elements or whatever, right? And wrong. You know what I mean? We needed a couple more 1,000 years to get to how many there actually are. So just we're on the tiny sliver of the beginning of that time span in health and fitness. And actually, one person said, well, this isn't very reassuring. You know what I mean? Like, how do I make an impact? Well, this is it. This is how an impact is made, by marching forward, by having good, clear thinking, by thinking about not only what you're doing, but why you're doing it. What is the philosophy behind this? You know, how do we advance the field? You know, when people use that quote, standing on the shoulders of giants, I've only seen further. Well, I mean, you can be standing on the shoulders of giants, but you're the next generation's giant. You know, that's what we're called to be right now.
Yeah, I love it. You know, I know Adam Fight, obviously, he's at Precision Nutrition, and we had him on the podcast before, and great guy. And he's currently doing his PhD around self-determination theory, which, you know, from Dossie and Ryan, and the big three tenets from that are autonomy, competency, and relatedness. So I heard you speak about too, like, you know, that a certain issue with coaches, maybe younger coaches too, because they don't quite have that experience yet, is being relatable to the client. So an example would be, you know, if you're young, single male, you know, your core values at that moment in your life are going to be very different to like Nancy, who's perimenopausal, mid, you know, 40s, 3 kids, you know, a lot of stress going on in her life. What advice would you give to maybe, you know, a younger coach, or I suppose any coach, John, in terms of maybe opening up their frame of reference to be more relatable to more sort of clientele in population?
That's a really, really great question, because I mean, on the one hand, we could paint this as a, you know, insurmountable divide. Like, how could, you know, young Charles, you know, who's 22 years old, ever understand Nancy's life, right? But I mean, we do have our shared humanity, first of all, and there are ways of understanding people's lives. There are very easy ways, you know, and one of them is curiosity and inquisitiveness. So, I mean, the path, I mean, one of the most interesting things in the world to me is the ability to ask questions and be open to internalizing the answers. People who ask the best questions are the ones who get deeper, faster insights. You know, it's simply not about consuming information. It's really about asking questions of that information and of the people who are providing it, you know? So Nancy, what you need to do before you rush to solving her problem is asking a whole ton of questions about what her life looks like. I mean, I'm really weird sometimes in social functions, because I'll meet a person, And I'll be like, I don't know what our shared life experience looks like, but I'm really curious. So I'll ask them questions. And then the way I think that people generally enter into these kind of conversations in social settings is they answer them at a different level of detail and granularity that I'm interested in. And I'll be like, no, no, no. What I really mean is when you wake up, what is the first thing that you do? You know what I mean? Like, and with that job. So, okay, I get what you do for a living is called this series of words. But like when you go to work and you sit down at your desk, what's the first thing you do in the morning, right? Like if I want to understand your job, I have to kind of get, not the words that you call it, I'm a landscape architect or whatever. You know, it's like, no, no, what do you do though at your desk? Where is your desk? Who comes in and interrupts you during the day? These are the ways that I try and construct a reality of this person so that I can better relate to them. I find it fascinating, the differences in how we spend our time at our desks or with our families or whatever. But I also think it's so instructive. And I don't think things like compassion and empathy can be manufactured out of thin air. I think the only way you can access them is through this kind of thing like question, you know, really, really thoughtful questions. And I think this about a lot of things. I mean, mindfulness is huge right now. Everyone's talking about mindfulness, but I don't think mindfulness is even a practice. I think mindfulness is a thing that you need to practice other things to get to. So for example, you know, when people are like, oh, you should be more mindful, it's like, well, great. That just feels like someone wagging their finger and telling me how to be. If I don't know how to be more mindful, what actions I have to take, like when I sit down on my mindfulness pad or wherever I'm going to sit, right? What do I have to do for the first few minutes? And that's what I'm interested in, right? So like at PN, how do we get people paying attention to their eating? Because otherwise it's just pay attention to your eating. Well, what do I attend to and how? Well, so the first thing we do is have people eat slowly, right? We're like, slow down. If it takes you 5 minutes, maybe take 7 minutes today. And then we want you to practice eating till satisfied, not stuffed. So we have to teach them what that might look like unpacked. Why are we doing these things? Well, it's to develop paying attention to your eating, mindful eating. You just can't do mindful eating. That's when people say like intuitive eating is dumb. If I, whatever, you know, paid attention to my intuition, I just eat ice cream all day. And I'm like, I get it, but there's a skill to build there, right? And so that's how I think about all this kind of stuff, including bridging the gap between any differences, whether it's a young trainer to older client, whether it's able-bodied trainer to client with disability. How do you can't possibly just know. So you have to admit that. Most of the people I'm going to face in my day as a coach, I can't possibly know what their life looks like. That has to be your starting assumption. Otherwise, you're just grafting your reality onto theirs, and it's never going to work unless everyone looks like you. You know, so if you're like a white dude from England who's 28 years old and has a history of strength and power sport, and you lift weights now, and every person who comes to see you is that exact description, then you're like, maybe you'll get 50% of it right. But you don't know what happens when they go home and what their recovery like and their stress levels and any of that. So it's best to just assume there's no way I'm going to understand anything about this person right out of the gate. So I need to discover, you know, I need to go mining for truths of what their life looks like. And you do that mining through, you know, really sort of thoughtful, compassionate questioning, you know, real curiosity, you know, what does your life really look like? Okay, the answer you just gave me, it doesn't help me. I need to know something a little more granular. What are you struggling? Okay, you're having a hard time eating X or showing up for Y. Explain that to me. I really want to understand, not so I can fix you right away, because your first fix may not be the fix at all, but so that I can really get it first. And then I'm going to noodle over it, spend a couple of days, and then I might come back with some suggestions. And hey, maybe while I'm thinking about it for the next couple of days, you can think about it too. sync up on it on Wednesday. You know what I mean?
A question I really love to get your take on, John, is it's a concept in Sapolsky's book Behave, and I've often heard Brett Bartholomew mention the word too, and I'm not too sure if I'm going to pronounce it or say it right, but Schadenfreude. Essentially, it's kind of like when we see someone else like achieve something that they set out to do, we're kind of jealous and we nearly want to sabotage them. And where I'm going with this question is when we are working with clients, how important is it for them to get their close, relatives and friends involved or aware of the process so that there isn't an unintentional sabotage? Because I've often seen this with clients too, that, okay, we'll say we'll take again maybe Nancy, and she really wants to, change certain habits in her life, be it lose a bit of the weight because she thinks that'll give her more self-confidence and self-esteem, and she just wants to be all around more healthier so she can see her kids grow and maybe then they have grandkids, etc. But her husband Phil, he's really insecure that he himself can't get to that current place in his life to take charge of his health and wellness, and he starts doing that passive aggressive, oh, you're eating rabbit food, or it's another diet you're on, and who's the coach this time? And how important do you think it is to address this with clients, be it bring it to their awareness or else get the partner involved?
Yeah, I heard actually Trevor Kashi, who's a PhD and does a lot of nutrition stuff as well, is pretty active in one of our Facebook groups, and he had a really great response to a question kind of similar to this. And I'll tell you what I really liked about it, but his response was like, you know, often the partner doesn't even know what's going on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they don't know who this new guy in their life is telling their wife what to do. You know what I mean? So he's like, sometimes I just have to bridge the gap. So what I often think about is it's the same as the last answer, really, which is the danger of assumptions. Okay, so you're a coach with no psychology degree. You're going to figure out the psychology of partner sabotage. You're going to diagnose it and then treat it. No, I don't think so. You know what I mean? Like, you're trained in exercise and nutrition, okay? So why don't you leave the rest, the diagnostics of human psychology, to the folks who actually do this for a living. And let's think about how they do it for a living. They do it through a series of questions and interviews over an extensive period of time. So you see it all the time. Coaches will be like, it's their partner sabotaging them for this reason, and here's how I'm going to handle it. I don't know. Sounds like a lot of oversimplistic bullshit to me. You don't need to know why it's happening. Maybe you just need to know what to do next, And I think what Trevor's kind of solve was the simplest possible first step is probably a good one, and it's probably based on relationship building. So normally what I do is I get on a call or a Skype or a Zoom with my client if it's distance-based, or go in person if it's an in-person client, with them and their significant other. And I introduce myself, and I'm really polite, and I let them know who I am, and I let them know what our goals are. And I ask them what their goal might be for this situation. I loop them into the process so that they feel like a participant rather than an outsider. And again, why it works, I mean, we can go study human psychology and behavior and make some hypotheses, which are guesses, but it doesn't really matter, right? What's the solve? Learn how to be with people, and this is what coaching is. This is what I think a lot of these things are, right? One of my favorite books, Crucial Conversations, which I've written about and talked about extensively. The idea behind client-centered coaching, the idea behind this, working with friends and family, marketing, customer insights, learning about the people you hope to serve. It's just all about being with people. We call it different names, but it's actually learning how to be skillful with other humans. And the way to be skillful in a situation where hopefully you deal with this before you have an antagonistic partner, But if you haven't dealt with it yet, then maybe the next step is deal with the antagonistic partner, but you need to be skillful with being with people. And again, the way to do that would be, hey, let's sit down. Let's talk about our shared goals. I want you to know what I'm here for and what I'm not here for. I'd love to know your thoughts on that and how we could, I don't know, co-create, shape it so that it feels better for you. Because otherwise, I mean, imagine yourself in the other scenario. You're not into health and fitness. Your partner isn't either, but decides they want to be. And now they have this new person in their life that you don't even know, just telling them what to do all the time. And when they tell them what to do, it affects what you can do. That sounds like some bullshit to me. You know what I mean? And so without some kind of open dialogue, of course, this is the outcome, you know? So, I mean, that's how I would think about handling it, you know, and obviously you want permission from your client. And so how do you get permission from your client? Same, be skillful with humans. You know, here's something that I've noticed from time to time. You know, when I start working with clients, their partners may feel X, Y, and Z. So before that ever comes up, maybe we can have a sit down and here's how I would like that to go, you know?
Kind of goes back to that concept of prevention's better than the actual cure.
Yes, absolutely. But if you haven't prevented, lots of people haven't prevented, you know, various things, then there are some strategies, you know, for reeling it back. There's a book behind me here that it's called How to Fight, and it's from just, you can see it's this tiny little book.
Yeah.
It's from a well-known Zen teacher, and one of his phrases that he uses quite often is this idea of skillfulness. You know, like when you have not been skillful being with people, how to apologize. And the apology is often this idea of saying, you know what, I'm really sorry I wasn't skillful in our interaction earlier, and I'd like to do better next time. You know, and that idea of skillfulness in being with people, I think is the root of a lot of things, unless you know, live in the wild and there are no people around.
Switching gears a little bit, John, give me your thoughts on mastery and delayed gratification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's mastery. I mean, it's something that I'm very, very interested in. Not just in the acquisition of masterful way of being. You know, what I'm really interested in is the first question, which is whether I should pursue it or not. You know what I mean? Like, you know, in undergrad, yes, I studied pre-med and nutritional biochemistry and all that, but all my minors and electives were psychology and philosophy. So I always like to begin with the first question. When someone says the word like the achievement of mastery, you know, the assumption is that's a good thing. You should want it. Go get it. Here's how, right? My first question is why? Is that what you should do in this domain? You know, because of the cost, right? Every path you chase down comes with a series of trade-offs. To get more of X, you have to give up some of Y. There's, you know, not enough room in life for all the X's and all the Y's to fit in, you know? So that's my first question. Is this something you should pursue? You know, I was with a client of mine, someone that I help mentor, and they were asking about, in their business, asking about, you know, the development of like a content creation capacity, right? How do I do amazing content like PN has done for, you know, 15 years? And I was like, I can tell you that path, but should you do it that way? You know? And the reason I asked that is because it's a great first question. And then the second thing is because this person is really, really good in a different format altogether, not long form written content. I'm like, that's what I'm introverted. I love sitting at my desk all day and writing. You know, if like 6-8 hours go by and no one comes through that door, no one calls me, and I can just write and craft something that I think has a great argument, is really compelling, is really instructive, is really interesting. That's a great day to me. But this guy and his team doesn't have that now. So I'm like, you're going to have to build a whole new capacity. something that you've never even spent a minute choosing to do prior. Why would you do that? Just because you're copying me? No. Here's what you need to do. You need to master the thing that you're already doing well. You know, it's the old saying, like, ride the horses in the direction they're going. You know, don't try and turn them around. So anyway, mastery. Yeah, there's a process for that. Should you go after it in a particular domain is the question. You know, I think about the same with like continuing education, right? Personal development, all super compelling things in this day and age, right? Personal development seems to be a thing that we consider an unquestioned good. Well, I like to question those things, right? It strikes me as we're at a pretty unique time in history where this is the important values set, right? In our field, you know, that if you're not every day trying to become better, then you're wasting your life. I'm like, there's a lot of cultures throughout history that would not have shared that value system. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's worth at least thinking a minute about whether this is what we should be spending our time on, you know? And if you're young and single and you have time and you kind of feel unfinished yourself, then maybe this is a good thing, you know? But there's other scenarios in life where maybe personal development, all your extra time spent on trying to become something else or better or whatever, isn't the best use of your time, you know? So anyway, that's tangential, but you know, presuming that mastery is the thing you want to go after, and presuming that you've made a thoughtful choice about that, and you're not just blindly stumbling into something that isn't right for you. You know, we talked about before we started recording, you know, I always love to use the Georges St. Pierre example because there is a tremendous commitment of time, energy, feedback, discomfort. That's what the road to mastery is. It's, you know, finding a way to be very comfortable in the daily practice of these things that progress you towards the bigger things, you know? And so you've heard me talk about this, but how do I think goals get accomplished? But it's by breaking those goals down into the skills required, and then breaking those skills down into the daily things that you need to do. And I actually even have a chart that I have people fill out where I'm like, right, okay, let's talk about your goal. Okay, let's unpack what skills will be required. And I do this in the areas I'm not an expert. Like if I need to get good at something, I find an expert and I say, all right, what skills do you think I'll need to stack on top of one another to really get good at this thing? And then, okay, I don't know how to build those skills. What would I do on Monday morning to start working on that? So then you can construct like all your homework for the year, you know, for how to get good at those skills and then maybe achieve those goals. But the Georges St. Pierre example, you know, I worked with him for a long time, and I remember before we had children, I remember Amanda was like 8 months pregnant, and George had a fight in Newark, New Jersey against Dan Hardy from UK, and George just dominated this fight. You know, he won every minute of every round, and he was the headliner, obviously. And so this thing ends at like 12:30, like after midnight. And he's been up all day preparing. And, you know, it's not a relaxing day leading up to a title fight, you know, and then you have to wait for everyone to fight before you. And then you start your performance at midnight, you know, and then you fight till 12:30. And then there's a whole cadre of like media waiting for you after that. But George was super pissed. And there's actually I might actually have it behind me here. I have a photo that George signed of after that fight. I actually have it. It's actually across from my computer here. And his hand is raised and his face looks so pissed off. That's actually from that fight. And it's because he had a number of opportunities to submit Dan via armbar, but he didn't finish him. And he was so annoyed after the fight. He got his jiu-jitsu coach, and they went for an hour. So from 12:30 till 1:30 in the morning to drill arm bars, because he's like, if I ever get a chance to submit someone, I'm going to do it or break their arm off. You know, he's like, I'm not going to fail at this thing again. And the media is waiting for him. there's a whole, his mom's there, his best friends, we're all at this suite waiting for him so we could go to a party. And the guy's drilling arm bars after a long day of work. These are the trade-offs, right? Like this is what this guy obsessed over his whole career. And so, you know, what is mastery except for the regular practice of these things that will build skills that are intelligently constructed, because each skill has to stack on the next. Like you have to get a little better at this so that you can actually do this. And you have to get a little better at this so you can do the next thing. And then constantly getting feedback on where you're not doing well, like aggressively hunting feedback. And this is a whole section of the Changemaker book where I talk about, I even give you scripts for asking for feedback from people. But the idea being that you have to not only be okay with, most people are just terrible at receiving it, right? So you have to be far from that, but not only good at receiving feedback, you actually have to go out and say, how can I constantly be in a position where people are giving it to me? And the best kind is the kind that tells me when I suck. And I need to want that really badly. And now I'm pretty good at this, but I'll tell you, and maybe some people are more evolved than me. I've not gotten to the point where there isn't the uncomfortable moment when you hear it. You know what I mean? Yeah. But you just get so good at not responding. You just let that moment pass by. Like the Buddhists say, it's just a passing cloud. You know what I mean? Like someone said, you know, I got one yesterday. I gave a talk recently, and it's the first time I ever gave that talk, and it was in front of, 300 people. And I got the feedback and it was pretty good, but then there are a couple of people who are highly critical in their notes, and my first response is, God, they must be a freaking idiot. But then you go, okay, let that cloud wash by. Don't say it out loud. Don't respond. Don't internalize that as truth, because it's not true. Their world experience, everything about them, everything that brought them there that day is true, So there's something about that and me and how they interfaced that made them feel like that guy's an idiot and I didn't like what he had to say. And maybe I can learn something from that. Maybe not. But if I dismiss it out of hand, then I can. And Peter Lemon, who you mentioned earlier, is my graduate mentor. He used to say this all the time, and I'll never forget it, because, when we would submit papers to scientific journals after having done research projects. Now, it's really easy to depersonalize the whole experience, but I mean, to get to the point where you've collected enough data to submit a paper for a research journal, like you've had to go raise funds, you've had to recruit subjects, you've had to do the experiments. Some of my research was done on an MRS unit, magnetic resonance unit, where we were measuring like substrates within various muscles. And to collect those data at the university hospital that I was at, you had to do it in the wee hours of the morning, because they were seeing patients all day, right? For research, you're paying a fraction of the price. So like I had to collect data at 3 a.m. So this is like the whole constellation of things that had to go into just getting those data so I could submit them, right? So the first thing that happens when a reviewer is hypercritical is you just hate them. You know what I mean? You're like, what an asshole. And Pete used to just say, just remember, these are the top people in the field. You don't get asked to be a reviewer if you're not really smart and accomplished. So while they may have gotten your point wrong, that's your fault, not theirs. It's the same thing as earlier with the clients, right? Take responsibility for what they've done, not just what you've told them to do. Same, take responsibility for what the reviewer interprets you're saying, rather than just what you said, because this happened all the time in grad school and post. Early faculty members would be like, these idiot reviewers, I said it so clearly. Like, well, obviously wasn't clear enough, And this was Pete's gentle advice constantly, Hey, just remember, these are some smart people. And if they didn't get it, then either they were just having a bad day or you didn't communicate it clearly enough. There's an opportunity for you here. And that's really just, I think, the fundamental lesson. There's always an opportunity for you here. How come the different facets of coaching and performance aren't integrated well at certain sporting there's an opportunity for you here. Yes, there may be some idiots, but who cares? You have no control over that. What can you do better? You know, and this is the hardest thing because it sucks to be told you're not amazing all the time, you know, but you have to get good at that if you want mastery and, you know, personal development, all of that. So it's really become a thing that I just teach all the people close to me. And I've really tried to work on the most myself, starting with me. You know, how do I just make sure I'm getting feedback constantly? You know, like this podcast, you know, when it's over, I'm going to go listen to it. And I listen to every podcast I do with a notepad critically to see what I did well and what I didn't do well. And then I look for opportunities. Oh, is there a better analogy I could have used? Was I rambling too much here? Oh, I sounded way too self-serving here. Oh, that one didn't go as well as the one the day before. What was the difference? Oh, I did one at 9 in the morning and one at 11 in the morning. Oh, yeah. I tend not to be as alert and as, you know, mentally energetic and flexible during this time. So I'm looking for that kind of stuff constantly. And I just think it's a huge opportunity for each of us to go turn this lens back on ourselves rather than out to the rest of the world and how everyone else is screwing up all the things for us. How can I just get better? You know, and I think that ties into mastery. It's like the unsung hero of mastery, regular feedback. And one of my good friends, maybe you've met Steve Messer. Stu coached him for years. He was part of the 2010 US Olympic bobsled team that won gold, and they were the first ones to win gold since like the 1950s. They were actually just inducted into the US Olympic Hall of Fame recently. And Steve works in the nonprofit sector now, and he works with a lot of executives and stuff like that. And he was just like, I wasn't prepared for how badly even the highest performers I know outside of sport are at taking feedback, because I lived in a world of sport where feedback is regular, daily, expected, turned into a adjustment on the fly. And I just expected that the highest achievers in every area would be doing that. And they're not, you know, or at least too few of them are. He's like, the average athlete is doing it, but only the top 0.1% of executive is doing it. And it's an interesting gap.
So much of what you said there resonates. You know, what comes to my mind is Ryan Holiday's book, Obstacles the Way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, choosing to see a certain situation as an obstacle or flip that coin and see it as an opportunity. And, you know, I think where I am in my life, and I've been lucky enough just with the sort of direct and what I would call indirect mentors being people maybe who pass and I've read their work, you know, to be influenced by them, to be in a position where I would be a person similar to yourself, John, where I'm always kind of asking myself in any situation, what can I learn from this? What can I take away from this? You know, what opportunity is this current situation giving me? And, you know, what you also reminded me of, and I laugh to myself now because the sort of dedicated listeners to this podcast, they'll probably be rolling their eyes because they'll go, oh, this is the bit where he'll mention these he'll mention these individuals and these books, but there's these three gentlemen who I always say had a huge influence on me through their work. And one is Bruce Lipton, wrote the book Biology Belief. Then there's a gentleman called Joseph Shilton Pearce. If you're not familiar with him, John, I really think you would love his work because he wrote so much on child development and, you know, spiritual development and personal development. And he wrote so much on child education, and he was just a beautiful, beautiful human being, Joseph Shilton Pearce. And then Jacques Fresco from the Venus Project, who was a futurist and an inventor and a sort of an engineer. He kind of engineered like what a future world could look like, a better, more self-sustaining planet. But what those three gentlemen made me realize, and I am going somewhere with this point, is that everyone and everything is the way they are for a reason. That, you know, there's this constant interaction between environment and the organism. And then obviously with us being the highest organism of all living organisms, we have the option to choose how we want to respond to any sort of stimulus at any sort of time. And just going on your point, when you said you gave a talk there, a talk, and you got some feedback, and some of the feedbacks, you know, you got one or two where, oh, it wasn't great, it wasn't good. And your mindset now is, instead of saying, you know, fuck that person, it's more like, well, let me step back and say, why did that person give that feedback? And then say, I understand that individual was in that sort of mindset in that exact moment in time for a specific reason. And how I always look at it is that every individual, again, is the way they are for a reason. And there's two sort of ways to look at it. There's chronic factors, long-term factors, which kind of determines more your personality trait. But then there's these transient acute factors, which determine your state. You know, and the long-term factors then are everything from what was the womb environment like when your mother had you as a fetus, to your early childhood experiences, to your schooling and your friends and your family, religion, culture, and on and on. Your social economic status and religion, they're all those chronic long-term factors that kind of, you know, really shape you. But then there's those transient factors that you only know too well, John. Did you sleep last night? Your blood sugar? Did you have a row with your spouse? And then that individual who goes to see John Berardi on a Sunday, whatever, or Saturday weekend, and they have all this going on in their lives, and you know, and everyone sees reality through their own lens. And then just because at that moment in time they had other stuff going on in their life, and they're like, you know what, I didn't think this was great. Whereas they could have been at another place in their life and it was the greatest thing ever. And my whole point is that to be able to step back as the receiver of that feedback and say, you know, look at this through a larger lens, saying, I understand that feedback is two things. One, it's a gift because I can see it as an opportunity rather than an obstacle. And I also need to appreciate that the person who gave it was in a specific mindset for a specific reason due to these chronic factors that have determined them as an individual and these transient factors. And all you can have for that is compassion and empathy and unconditional love and understanding. And I always cap this off with this. I say that as a human being who struggles to apply these things as anyone else.
Well, you know, I think this is the moment where we can do the externalizing thing too easily, right? And then we go, yes, and people like that. And then that's when you have to stop and go, wait, I'm a person like that because I have chronic factors and acute factors. I don't show up as my best self each time. You know, sometimes I show up as a better self than other times. And, you know, I've talked about this often before, you know, there's one of my greatest life challenges as a person interacting with other people is that my first instinct after something that doesn't go my way is to blame others. And early in my life, I would just blame them out loud. You know what I mean? Then I would realize, oh, this is fruitful for relationships and getting what I want out of life. Then I would just blame them internally, you know? And then I've thankfully gotten to the place in my life where I can't eradicate that. That's the first thing that still occurs to me. But I can let it go like a passing cloud. And every time I practice this, the cloud passes just a little bit faster. And I don't think it'll ever not pass. But I think that I can go, oh, it's only taking about half a second now for me blaming the other people for screwing up my life and being idiots to just wash over it. And then for me to go, oh yeah, oh, there it goes. And then, and by the way, that wasn't true. Like, it's not their fault or whatever. So as you say, I'm someone who struggles to apply this. That's great. So then we exercise that same compassion we want to apply to others, to ourselves, and go, hey, I'm going to give myself the same birth. I have all of the chronic and acute factors influencing me, and I was this way, and here's how I'd like to be. And I think meditation's become so fatty nowadays, but I think if I were to say outside of enlightenment, what can someone just practicing meditation in a non-fanatical way benefit most from? It's this idea that you can, because part of the practice of meditation is watching thoughts come and go without attaching or sticking or being felt to be more real than they are. And that's the whole goal. It's not to clear your mind, but it's to watch the thoughts just pass by your mind without going, oh, why am I thinking about this? Or I'm doing meditation wrong. Or, oh, that thought, I have to solve it right now. Just go, oh, there's a thought, that's a thing. And Then when you get that practice in the context of your actual life, not of meditation, it gets easier to watch the clouds go by without attaching to them. And I think this is where most people who are not, trying to be a enlightened monk or something, get the most benefit from meditation. I know for me, that's been it. It just gives me an extra beat before I say the dumb thing that I was going to say, to remember that it's just a passing cloud, and I can let it pass. And sometimes I don't let it pass. You know what I mean? And then I can also have compassion for the self that didn't let it pass and go, oh, all right, well, poor little JB. You know what I mean? Let's
Yeah.
next time we'll try again. We have another chance to practice this tomorrow. So I love the authors that you mentioned and their work, and then where it culminates in this kind of starting with yourself. Because this is really it. I mean, this is what we've been talking about a lot in this podcast. Start with yourself. Um, how can you work on the things that you have control over? Certainly. Um, and then there's good things that come from that, obviously, being a good example for others and all that. And then just sort of enhancing the quality of your own life. Um, and so I think, the feedback is required though. That's where we were sort of beginning this whole thing.
Yeah.
You need to get feedback regularly, or else you'll not get enough practice, and then you won't be good at receiving it. And I think about this often. Crucial conversations I mentioned earlier, they used, like, difficult conversations with people, staff, partners, people I didn't like, used to just stress me out. I'd take the whole day preparing for this thing, and what are they going to say, and what am I going to say, and angsty. And then when I learned, hey, crucial conversations, there's a strategy for making these go well, but I'm not going to be good at it unless I get practice. So now whenever difficult conversations come up, I'm like, yes, this is amazing. And the part of me is like, you used to hate these. And I'm like, yeah, that's because I wasn't skillful. And I may not be yet, but how else will I get reps? You know what I mean? It's like if the gym was only open twice a week. You're like, yeah, gym's open today, I can get reps. You know what I mean? So difficult conversations are your chance to get reps, and they're infrequent. So when the gym's open, you got to go. You got to get the workout,
Again, so much gold in that. So, JB, I know we've got 8 minutes left here, and there's one other thing I'd like to ask. But just wrapping up on our conversation there on mastery and attaining feedback, and you mentioned there a number of times about self-responsibility, and it just reminded me of, I remember I asked Paul Check one time on an interview. I was young. I wasn't, I was younger than I am now, and I was sort of, it was my initial dive into, like, the question of what spirituality, like what does it mean to be spiritual? And it's funny because I've heard him answer this question, like, more lately, and he has a different answer now than what he gave me, and I actually prefer the answer he gave me, and I love this answer. He just said, being a spiritual person is nothing more than taking responsibility for what you bring into creation moment to moment. And he said that to me almost a decade ago, and it's like, that's it verbatim, word for word, that he said.
Yeah.
It just really struck me. And what I took away from that was, again, like, if you're not good enough for yourself, who else are you good for? And another thing I've often heard Paul say is, if you don't wear it, you can't share it. And again, going back to, if you are going to work on compassion and empathy and unconditional love and understanding, as you already alluded to, you got to try and work on that stuff with yourself first and foremost. Like, why do I behave that way? Why does that thought enter my head? And then do it and then it's to get to that place of not judging it and being, and then having forgiveness towards yourself. Because again, if you can do that, you can maybe start to share that to the world around you.
Yeah, and like little prompts for doing that are, next time you feel compelled to comment on someone's actions on social media, stop. Think about how that in the context of your own life and how you can level up that aspect of your life. So it's not necessarily that you need to stop posting on social, but you can use that as a behavioral trigger to start doing better at the things that you need to work on. And I remember posting about this, and someone was like, but what about when you see injustice in the world? You know, isn't it up to you to speak out? And I don't know. I don't know, but I'm not going to say yes. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to say no either. But does, I don't know, lighting on fire your grievance against someone's behavior help correct that behavior? I mean, we don't see that often the case. You don't see people getting called out in public forums and then going, oh yes, now I've seen the error of my ways. I will be making amends now, you know? Usually you see a deeper entrenchment in their belief system, you know? So I mean, in a vacuum, should we speak out against injustice? Check yes or no. So decontextualize, everyone would of course check yes, you know? But the context is important, you know? Does that actually change the behavior? Often no. What may actually contribute to some value creation in the world? You working on yourself, bringing your best self to all these interactions, you know? So it's, again, no judgment on what people do on social media, but I like to use it as a little trigger because it is, I mean, the last 2 years I've done this experiment on Facebook. So I actually have a logbook of this. So I would post what would be considered like a more controversial post about a topic. And so I would catalog things as like controversial, tackling a deep subject, non-controversial, tackling a deep subject, okay? And so my controversial tackling a deep subject post would get 15 times the engagement on average. Like I would write down the number of likes and shares and comments, right? And so within that category of controversial versus non-controversial would be, controversial would be I would blame the industry or the people out there of being a certain way. And the non-controversial would be we should look to ourselves to not be a certain way. Okay, so I have these sort of comparator drawn because I'm really interested. People on the social space really love piling on judgment of others, right? So if I were to say in our industry we need to be more sensitive about X, people who are not sensitive about X, Y, right? Yes, people do need to be more sensitive about, fuck those people. You know what I mean? Like jump all over them, right? But if I were to say, in our industry, we do a lot of X. I'd even wager you do a lot of X. Your next action might be crickets. You know what I mean? We just aren't that programmed or inclined to see the faults of others in ourselves, right? And so again, I mean, you get 15 times the engagement, and I don't think the Facebook algorithm is actually like scrolling the content of the post and trying to feed incendiary and divisive behavior. I think it's our choice. We are voting for consistently, 15 times in my little experiments are not best selves. And so again, I love this as a moment because so much of us spend so much time on socials as a trigger to go, hey, I was about to pile on the judgment of someone else. This might be a great time to look for the opportunities for improvement in myself, you know?
Yeah. Fantastic. I really want to ask you about getting feedback from your kids.
Mm-hmm.
If you've time to tackle that, that'll be the very last question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a thing. I read a lot of child psychology, developmental psychology. Our children go to Montessori school, and we have a remarkable staff there and a remarkable community there that's really quite special. And so I'm constantly coming home with books and uh, from original writings of Maria Montessori to, current applied stuff. And so I'm always just looking for little nuggets that, this kind of learning helps me in every aspect. It helps me in my coaching. It helps me in my PN work. It helps me in my change maker work. And then obviously it helps me as a parent. Um, so yeah, I remember reading about this idea of getting feedback from your kids, and I was like, duh, why haven't I started? This is exactly what I talked about earlier, right? It's so fascinating where, I've been preaching this idea of asking clients 0 to 10 confidence testing for, 15 years. Um, Yet I've not done it in this other aspect of my life where it's the perfect thing, right? So, I'd love to be a good dad. That's one of my goals, right? Some people say that. It's one of mine. How will I know if I'm being a good dad?
You got to get feedback.
Ask. You know what I mean? You ask, right? How will you know if your client can do the thing that you are recommending they do? You ask. How do you know if you're doing a great job as a dad? You ask. So I started doing this, every couple of months. I sit down with each child. We have 4 individually. Um, as young as 3, it works. Um, and I ask them, I say, hey, listen, whatever one I'm talking to, um, as you know, like I want to be a good dad. I work pretty hard at it, but I know that I have lots of areas that I can improve. I'd love to know I'd love to know what you think, how, in terms of how I can do better as a dad. And if you want, you can tell me some of the areas you think I'm doing really well too, but you don't have to do that part. I'm most interested in the areas where you think I can do better. And, a 3-year-old will tell you some fascinating things, from their perspective, and it's been a really, really valuable tool, not just as a way to collect feedback I can action on, but as a way to connect, as a way to demonstrate my care. I think that's part of the magic here. Like I'm demonstrating to them that it matters, that they matter, that their thoughts matter, that our relationship matters. So I think that's giving you some percentage of benefit. And then if they actually give me feedback and their opinion matters, that's some additional benefit in our relationship. And then if I go and action that and they see me trying harder and doing that, it's just so relationship building, and I even feel myself getting slightly choked up here because, I did this with our boys who are 7 and 5. Our girls are 9 and 3, in the spring this year. And they gave me some feedback. And I really worked hard on it, and this summer in particular. And by the end of the summer, our relationship was changed, and we had a fine, great relationship prior. But, even Amanda, my wife's been commenting on it like, wow, you and the boys really have a connection now. You guys have something kind of magical right now. And so I'm like, I know. It's like, I'm getting a lump in my throat as I talk to her about it because it's so easy to do. And it's such a shame that we don't do it often enough as humans with each other. You know what I mean? It's just so easy to do, to say, I love you, I care about you. And we can do this with our clients too. Like this isn't parenting and coaching. This is what I talked about earlier, being with humans, being with other people. I love you, I care about you, what you have to say matters to me, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this thing. And then how can I be better in our relationship? And then taking some action on it. I mean, it works really well,
Yeah, it's phenomenal. John, this has been an absolute pleasure. And I'm not just saying this to score more brownie points, but you literally have been you have been an individual who I've really always wanted to have an opportunity to talk to, and I really do appreciate your time, and I'm so looking forward to Changemaker and the Academy, because I just think that the more information like that can get to the masses, it can only do good in the world. So just for
yeah.
individuals listening, JB, where can they find out more about Changemaker, and where can they find out more about you, If you just want to give any information there on that.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd love to do for all the folks who listened is put together a little package where they can download a free sample of the book with some cool bonuses and stuff like that, and then also if they like that and want to actually go on to get the whole book, put together a little discount again for folks who tuned in today. So maybe we can drop that in the show notes, but
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to just, I'm going to put together a little sample that includes all the front matter and the intro in chapter 1. And so folks can get a sense for what it's like. If people like this conversation, they are going to relish in this book. I mean, it talks about, there's a lot of coaching specific stuff. There's also business stuff, but there's also career stuff. Like, how do you figure out it? Like, let's say you define health and fitness as the space you want to work in, but how do you figure out where to go within that even? You know what I mean? Should you host a podcast? Should you coach clients every day? Should you write? What is your specific unique ability, and how do you align that with the purpose? Again, so vague are most of the answers. I want to help people. Well, it's great. You can be a paramedic and help people. You can serve coffee and help people. If you want to be in this space, you have to be a little more specific. And then we have to figure out, like that one guy I talked about earlier, should you be writing long form content to do it? Should you be lecturing to do it? Should you be working one-on-one with people to do it? And then what are your value systems, and how do you integrate those three together? So there's stuff on that. And then there's a whole chapter on reputation, which is this feedback stuff in both directions. We talked about how to receive feedback, but I also talk about how to give feedback in the book, as a tool to help others grow, but also as a tool to grow your reputation. So again, this is, what I hope, what I think. I worked really hard over 2 years to try and pull out what I think the truths are of what I've learned. Wasn't always easy to do. And at times I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I might just give up. But that's what the book became. I look around the industry and I see a lot of really good-hearted people with good intentions who have had one of a host of sort of superhero origin stories about why they got into this field in the first place. But they have no idea what to do with that, and that's why 4 out of 10 of them won't be working in the field next year. That's the turnover. And so I'm like, someone has to do something about this, So anyways, I wrote a book on this, and I think it only costs around $20, which I think is a pretty good deal for 30 years of experience. So yeah, I'd love to share some free stuff with the folks. And if they want to come check it out, before they get the show notes, they can check out changemakeracademy.com, and we've got all the stuff on there.
Great. I'll be in there. Listen, as I said to you before we started, I've like this whole notebook. I had pages of like little notes, and even you just talking about core values there. I mean, another conversation I'd love to have with you in a future date is, about core values and like the reevaluation of core values throughout our life, because obviously our values change throughout our life. The value of the core values of a 20-year-old single dude in college compared to when he's 35 with mortgage and 3 kids. It's quite different. So
yes, in the book. In the book, I actually have people write out a schedule of how often they'll reevaluate their purpose, unique abilities, and values. For this very reason, right? Like again, Epstein talks about it in his book. This going through these paths of life are what help you rule out and then rule in other options and opportunities for you. And so if you don't constantly intentionally reevaluate, then you're governing your current life using like 10, 20-year-old software,
I also found it funny too, you described, I'm nearly sure it was on the Legendary Life podcast interview. It was definitely one of the many I listened to, but you were describing about, how you've moved on now from PN, and that was a massive company, and then this, Changemaker Academy came up for the conversation with a band. They're like, I think I'm actually going to start another company.
I know. I just didn't want to.
Yeah.
She was like, what are you going to be working on? And I was like, I think I have to start another company.
I love the way you say it too, yeah.
She's like, do you want to start another company? I'm like, no, but I have to. I mean, that's really what happened. I wrote this book, and then I was like, my God, this is my purpose.
Yeah.
Like now, uh, I won't be filling up my foyer closet with DVDs and going to Canada Post 3 times a week and shipping them out from my home like I did back then.
Back in the day.
Fortunately, I've learned a whole bunch of, it doesn't need to be Groundhog Day. I can hire a competent team and I can teach them how to do this stuff versus me doing it, which is refreshing,
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, I just found myself really called to do this work now because it really does. It's like a leveling up. I was using PN as a tool to help accomplish this purpose of helping shape the industry, and I think you've done some good work in that regard. But now I'm like, I can go right for the heart of this. I can speak right to this idea of career and how to be in this field, without having to use the vehicle of nutrition. The concern that I had all along was just, is the field ready for it? There's a lot of people who are just trying to get a couple clients and stay afloat. Are they open, willing, ready to spend time and invest on the idea of career?
Yeah.
And I mean, we dropped the book 2 weeks ago. We started talking about it 2 weeks ago. It you know, it hit the top 100 on Amazon. So maybe they are ready. you know.
Yeah. Just so much of what you say resonates with what OPEX stands for too. So, JB, this has been an absolute pleasure. And as I've been kind of saying lately in all the episodes to all the listeners, you're spoiled rotten, people, with all this amazing information from these brilliant guests we get on. But John, I really appreciate you. I appreciate everything you've done, and I appreciate your time.
Okay, thanks, my friend. Thank you for having me. And for everyone who's listening, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Peace.